appeared in its magnificent cathedrals and stained glass windows, which were larger than had ever been seen before. Gothic art emerged out of France and flourished between the 12th and 16th centuries. Referred to as the new fashion at the time, Gothic art deviated from the more common, highly esteemed imitations of classical Roman art. Art historian Giorgio Vasari later denounced Gothic art as inferior to classical Roman style. Regardless of early criticism, the legacy of Gothic art continues to influence cathedral architecture and design. Predominantly used in architecture, the Gothic style drew inspiration from an earlier style called Romanesque. Romanesque cathedrals had the same spacious atmosphere as Gothic cathedrals, but differences in structural design gave them each a distinct look. Romanesque cathedrals were low and wide. Gothic were strikingly tall. Romanesque had separate areas. Gothic had one integrated space. Romanesque had limited light, but Gothic cathedrals were flooded with natural light. The three most identifying characteristics of Gothic architecture are the ribbed vault, the flying buttress, which is an external support that extends from the wall to the ground, and the pointed arch. Gothic cathedrals were breathtakingly tall and drew visitors' gaze up to the heavens with their impressive vaults. Gothic architects continually tried to outdo the cathedrals that had come before by designing taller and more impressive roofs. In 1284, the ambitiously tall Beauvais Cathedral, 48 meters tall at its highest point, actually collapsed. But instead of compromising on its height, it was reconstructed with the same dimensions, but this time supported with extra flying buttresses. Among the architectural marvels of the Gothic period is the French Cathedral of Saint Denis, which was commemorated to Saint Denis, the first bishop of Paris. The Cathedral of Saint Denis served as a burial place for almost every king who reigned between the 10th and 18th centuries. The chevet, or rounded headpiece of this church, is believed to be the first Gothic construction ever made. The removal of dividing walls and use of slim columns to support the vaults gave the interiors of this cathedral a spaciousness that had never been achieved in previous designs. But the innovative headpiece was not all this cathedral was famous for. In the 12th century, the abbot Suger brought in some unique architectural concepts to redesign portions of the abbey, and gave it its current, unmistakably Gothic look. Many cathedrals and abbeys that subsequently popped up in the north of France and England drew heavily from this design and style, especially after King Louis VII gave his stamp of approval to the Cathedral of Saint Denis. The art of the Gothic period took on a naturalistic style, and this characteristic remained dominant until the end of the 15th century. This was the time when stained glass windows were first introduced in churches and cathedrals. A distinctive window design found in early Gothic art is the rose window, which is a large circular window which separates petal-shaped panels of colorful stained glass with sculpted stone. The frames, or tracery, around both stained glass and ordinary windows in Gothic cathedrals were sculpted with flowers and geometrical designs that became more and more complex and elegant. The Cathedral of Notre Dame was begun in 1211, and construction on the cathedral continued for more than 100 years. This cathedral has two spires, both measuring 105 meters tall. It has hundreds of sculpted figures standing on its ledges, and they even transformed the building's supports, the pillars, into saintly figures. The frescoes of Gothic churches give us a glimpse of what the painting of this era looked like. Some outstanding examples of Gothic art can be seen in the frescoes and paintings of the Lorenzetti brothers, Simone, Martini, and Giotto. However, illuminated manuscripts, or intricately illustrated books, are the most comprehensive record of paintings from this era, as many of the murals which had formerly decorated churches were replaced with stained glass windows and paintings. Almost all illuminated manuscripts were religious in nature, primarily Bibles and prayer books. Wealthy noblemen paid well for illustrated manuscripts, so many artists engaged in this sort of work. By the end of the 14th century, the discovery of cheaper printing methods made illuminated manuscripts more lightweight, compact, and accessible. The most famous illustrators of illuminated manuscripts were the Lambeau brothers, who are best known for painting Jean de France's Book of Hours. Whereas it used to be common practice for printmakers to copy both the text and the illustrations of illuminated manuscripts instead of creating new ones, the Lambeau brothers' Book of Hours featured original illustrations throughout the book. This book included not only religious illustrations, but historical imagery with subjects like the plague. The Book of Hours features several innovations of Gothic illuminated manuscripts, such as intricate borders, smaller decorative initials, and illustrations at the bottom of the pages filled with text. Gothic art was highly symbolic, and one of the most significant symbols of the time was Christ as a lamb. This metaphor was not a new concept, as the lamb was always seen as the symbol of the ultimate sacrifice, and early Christians equated Jesus to the Good Shepherd who would lead their souls to peace. The lamb is believed to represent the nature of Christ, a gentle and innocent heart who chose to forgive enemies rather than fight. It's not quite as easy to identify decorative Gothic art as it is to spot Gothic architecture with its pointed arches and multi-ribbed pillars. However, one characteristic throughout all Gothic art is the importance of calligraphy and predominance of line. Cascading draperies with narrow folds and pleats was a common motif in Gothic art. Another common trait was the extreme stylization of the human body. Many of the artworks during this time highlight this tendency, with their high-waisted maidens and slender oval faces. All Gothic art aimed to depict the divine in a rich and dramatic way that would inspire devotion in those who encountered it. Decorative art from the Gothic period includes the statues of saints and gargoyles that filled the Gothic cathedrals, metal chalices and reliquaries, as well as ornately carved picture frames and diptychs, or paintings on two hinged wooden panels. Although the succeeding Renaissance artists would reject many aspects of the Middle Ages, they saw the importance of architecture